Fortune magazine turning a lot of heads, naming a pharmaceutical company, Lannett, as its fastest growing company in 2015. Now, Lannett develops, manufactures, and distributes drugs that treat diseases from glaucoma to migraine headaches. Joining us right now on a Fox Business exclusive is Lannett Company CEO, Arthur Bedrosian. Good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Congratulations to you. Fastest growing company, according to Fortune magazine. That's got to make you feel good.
Well, it does, but as you know, I don't run the drug company by myself. 460 employees, and now with the acquisition, almost 1,000 employees run the company day to day. I'm just the face of the company, and we're proud of the work we do. We're proud of the fact that we're in the healthcare industry, and we treat diseases and hopefully cure some people from their illnesses.
And a generic company that actually is able to offer these drugs at much lower prices than the drugs that are currently on the market. Let's not forget that in terms of the generic story.
That's absolutely correct. I've been doing this for 47 years, and that's one of the stories nobody really talks enough about, is we actually reduce the cost of healthcare. We actually bring more affordable products to the marketplace. Most people who can't afford a brand product, let's say, are able to afford the product once it becomes generic, and that's one of the things we do.
I'm glad you mentioned the acquisition that you made recently, Kremers Urban Pharmaceuticals, Inc. Let me ask you why this acquisition was so important. You say that you're expecting to achieve approximately $40 million in cost reductions, but why was Kremers such an important acquisition for you?
Well, actually, there were two companies that came on the market suddenly, and one of them that was of interest to me was the one that I'd known for a longer period of time. And then when we looked at the two companies, before there was any information about them, we just looked at the product lines, we found that Kremers Urban's was more similar to Lannett. Same size, same type of thinking behind it, where they went after blockbuster drugs, for example, and planned to have limited competition. We went after lower marketed brand drugs, same theory, having less competition in the marketplace. You know, in the generic space, sometimes you have up to 10 competitors. You probably need only one or two to cover the United States. So when there's a lot of competition, there's usually very low margins and sometimes no profits at all.
And we know that healthcare has been the one area of business that has been consolidating huge. I mean, it's the leading sector in terms of M&A volume this year. That's expected to continue. What's behind all these deals?
Well, with all the regulation, it's easier to buy a company than to build one or expand one. Unfortunately, that's the dilemma of all the regulations we deal with. We're the most highly regulated industry in the country. And when you're trying to open up a new pharmaceutical plant, for example, as we wanted to expand in Philadelphia, it would have taken 2 years, roughly $180 million, before I even had any FDA approval to manufacture there. As opposed to acquiring a company where I can be marketing products right away.
Well, we spoke with the chairman and CEO of Merck, Ken Frazier, yesterday, and we talked about all of the consolidation, but as it relates to taxes and why we're seeing so much change because companies are trying to get a better situation when it comes to taxes. Listen to what he had to say. I want to get your take on tax reform.
Sure.
We need a tax code that doesn't put U.S. companies at a disadvantage. And that means lowering the statutory rate. And it also means, importantly, going to a territorial system. You know, the U.S. is the only country, at least the only advanced country, that wants to tax ex-U.S. revenue as though it had been taking place in the U.S. And companies like Merck, companies like Apple, all face the double taxation penalty if they bring their offshore cash to the United States.
Arthur, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, I'm one of those that manufactures and does everything in the United States, so I'm penalized for that. Right. I'm competing against global companies that have far lower tax rates. That's one of the reasons why it's cheaper to acquire a company than to build one. Right. Where's the money going to come to build these when the taxes, we pay 35% on our corporate earnings. Right. That's extraordinary.
And when Pfizer merges with Allergan, they're going to pay 14%, okay, because they're in Ireland and that's a lower tax rate. Let me ask you about this Fortune magazine piece. They're calling you the fastest growing company of 2015. Where does the growth come from at Lannett in 2016?
Well, that was one of the reasons for the acquisition. We had chose the fiscal year ending June 30th in 2015 for a time for us to do acquisitions. 3 years ago, we started to put some effort into business development, and we were looking for acquisitions. We met a few people, did a lot of due diligences, and most people tell you, you look at a lot of companies before you focus and settle on one, and then closing the transaction takes a bit of doing as well. So we were able to focus on that. This year we did one we called the Little Tuck-In. It was a small 13 million revenue company, and that one we closed the transaction June 1. That was a company called Silarex. Kremers was in the works shortly thereafter, so for the entire summer we were working head over heels to try to get that deal closed. Growing the company really makes you less vulnerable as a company because the market, is contracting in the customer base. So you find a lot of acquisitions and mergers going on amongst the retailers and the wholesalers.
Yeah.
And then at the other end with the manufacturers, you have a lot of consolidation there because of the heavy competition.
Look, I know you were in the business of keeping prices low for drugs. That's your business. You're a generic drug maker. What do you think of a guy like Martin Shkreli, who raised the HIV drug by 5,000%?
Well, kind of ashamed of him as an industry because he doesn't represent the other 10,000 companies that don't do things like that. And it's unfortunate we've been painted by that brush. It's sad. I mean, I understand everybody wants to make profits. I just think that, he doesn't come from pharma, and he really didn't understand what he was doing, and he made a mistake. Now, granted, to his shareholders, he may be a hero, but I think to the general population and the pharma industry, he's harmed us.
Yeah. Arthur, good to have you on the show.
Okay, thank you very
so
much
for joining us, Arthur Bedrosian there. Congratulations on the Fortune magazine.
Thank you very much.
Peace. Appreciate you joining us. Well, you